The clink of the coffee mug hitting the marble counter didn't prepare me for what came next. I was still groggy, hair knotted from sleep, wearing that soft old robe I refused to toss no matter how many threads it lost. Morning sun filtered lazily through the blinds, scattering light across the breakfast bar where Lucas stood, polished, distant, rehearsed. He didn't offer a smile or even a glance. Just paper. Clean, legal, final. "You're kidding," I said, but the words came out flat. I wasn't asking. Lucas slid the manila envelope toward me like it held a menu, not the demolition of my life. "It's all been reviewed. Just needs your signature." I didn't touch it. My fingers tightened around the handle of my mug, warmth bleeding into my palm as if the coffee might anchor me. Is this a joke? A conversation we forgot to have? He leaned back, hands in the pockets of those tailored slacks he always wore when he wanted to feel powerful. "We've been unhappy for years, Isabel. You just didn't want to see it." No, that wasn't true. I had seen it. The space that grew between our goodnights. The way he stopped asking for my opinion at work. How he started showing up later and later to dinners, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. But I had believed, naively, stupidly, that this was just one of those valleys marriages we're supposed to navigate. "You're leaving me?" I whispered. He blinked. "No, I'm divorcing you." And that was worse. I opened the envelope with slow, deliberate care, like peeling back a wound to see just how deep it went. Inside were the papers, crisp and final, with clauses highlighted in yellow, his little gift of efficiency. Full ownership of Harper and Stone Interiors would go to him. The house, too. Every account, every asset, even the damn vacation property in Aspen we'd barely used. My name was absent from everything. My contributions erased. "You're claiming all of it?" I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. He didn't flinch. "I built the infrastructure. You were the creative. You still have your talent, Isabel." I wanted to throw the mug. I wanted to scream and demand an explanation that actually resembled the truth. But instead, I set the coffee down, smoothed my robe, and swallowed everything rising inside me. Rage. Grief. The sheer audacity of it all. He expected me to crumple. He expected tears. That had always been Lucas's game, push until I broke, then point to the pieces and call it fragility. "I see," I said, my voice steady, cold. "So this was the plan all along?" He shifted, discomfort cracking through his carefully composed face. "Don't be dramatic." No. No more letting him name my emotions for me. No more letting him paint my reactions with colors he thought were easier to digest. I stood up slowly, letting the silence stretch between us until he finally looked unsure for the first time all morning. "You think you can just take everything," I said, not a question. "Erase me from the business I helped build, from the life I helped shape. You're free now," he offered weakly. "You'll land on your feet. You don't know a damn thing about where I'll land." He gave a tight, forced smile and turned toward the door like the matter was settled, like he had performed some cruel kindness. And maybe, in his mind, he had. Maybe Lucas thought there was nobility in the clean cut, in the formality of a morning ambush that left no room for dignity. The door closed softly behind him. I stared at the space he left behind. The bar stool he always leaned on. The ugly art piece he insisted we buy from a designer friend. Every object was coated in betrayal now, glinting with the smug residue of his decision. But the strangest thing was I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart on the kitchen floor or call anyone to pour out the wreckage. Instead, I walked to the window, peeled back the curtain, and watched his car pull out of the driveway. And then, in the deepest, quietest part of me, something ignited. He wanted this to be over. Neat. Clean. He wanted to win before I realized we were even playing. But he had underestimated me. I wasn't going to play the role of the discarded wife in the background of his story. I wasn't going to let Harper and Stone become his trophy while I disappeared like an afterthought. I turned back to the counter, slid the envelope aside, and grabbed a notepad from the drawer. My hand was steady as I began to write, dates, names, ideas. I wasn't sure what the strategy was yet. I only knew one thing for certain. He'd handed me a goodbye. But I wasn't leaving. Not like this. It started with the login screen. Harper and Stone's project management dashboard, once my morning ritual, now blinked a red denial. Invalid credentials. I tried again, slower, double-checking every letter. Still locked out. Confused, I opened our internal email platform, but the same rejection met me there. My access to the digital heart of the business had vanished overnight. That was when it really hit me. Lucas hadn't just handed me divorce papers, he had orchestrated a quiet erasure. I wasn't just being pushed out of a marriage. I was being scrubbed from a life. The office had always been our second home. He took care of the back end, the finances, the hiring, the contracts. I made the spaces come alive, the concepts, the mood boards, the feeling clients chased but couldn't name until they saw it. I was the Harper. He was the Stone. At least, that's how we had introduced ourselves for nearly a decade. But now, looking back, I realized the slow shift had started long before the papers landed on the counter. Little things. Lucas insisting we move payroll management to a more secure system, and how he'd laughed off my confusion when he changed the administrator passwords. How he'd insisted clients send invoices directly to his email, just for simplicity. Even how he'd subtly begun using my team instead of our team in meetings. At the time, I thought it was stress. Growth. Some necessary evolution of roles. Now I could see it for what it was, a surgical removal. 1 inch at a time. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the framed photo above the fireplace us, 5 years ago, smiling in front of our first showroom. He had his arm around me, and I was holding a sample board like it was a child. I looked proud. He looked smug, maybe. Like he already knew something I didn't. I opened the file cabinet in my home office. My fingers flipped through invoices, sketches, NDAs, documents with my handwriting, my signature, my touch. Proof that I had built just as much as he had. More, maybe. But none of it lived online anymore. None of it had a digital footprint that pointed to me. In a world ruled by login access and email threads, paper might as well have been myth. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream or fight. It was quieter, crueler. It was the creeping realization that he had been writing me out of our shared story while still smiling across the dinner table. I found a notebook from 3 years ago, thick with sketches from our Elmhurst project. Lucas had called that launch a turning point. "You've redefined modern coastal," a client had said. I remembered how Lucas had squeezed my hand under the table, told me I was brilliant. A week later, he filed the design credit under his name for an awards submission. I'd let it go. Told myself the business mattered more than the recognition. That it was a partnership and we were stronger as one. What a lie that turned out to be. I pulled out my personal laptop and began searching for my name in connection to Harper and Stone. Articles. Blog features. Mentions. The deeper I dug, the more glaring it became. Lucas had been systematically redirecting the narrative for years. Where once I had been co-founder, I was now original creative lead. In some write-ups, I wasn't mentioned at all. He had rewritten history in real time. Slowly, invisibly. And I'd let him. My stomach tightened. I wasn't sure if it was anger or shame. Maybe both. I had been so focused on the dream, on building something lasting, that I never thought to question the foundation beneath me. I had trusted Lucas. Trusted the version of us that said we were better as a team. Now I understood, I was never meant to be his equal. I was just the scaffolding until his structure could stand alone. I looked at my reflection in the laptop screen. Hair unbrushed, circles under my eyes, but something else, too. A flicker. Not fire. Not yet. But friction. The beginning of heat. If he wanted to erase me, he was going to have to do more than change a few logins and fake a narrative. I was still here. And I remembered everything. I pulled out a pen and wrote across the top of a fresh page what he took. Underneath, I listed every project I had spearheaded. Every client who had called me first. Every aesthetic choice that had my fingerprints all over it. I wasn't just gathering memories, I was collecting evidence. Proof of authorship. Of existence. Of legacy. This wasn't just about marriage anymore. This was about identity. About not letting someone else write my ending. Lucas may have locked me out of the accounts, but he hadn't locked me out of the truth. And I was done being a ghost in my own story. The first call I made wasn't to cry or vent. It was to Raina Cole. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert, like she never really stopped being in a courtroom. Isabel? I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. She'd been too busy grinding through high-stakes divorces and corporate takedowns. But the second I heard her voice, I remembered why people feared her and trusted her in equal measure. I need you, I said, no preamble. Lucas served me papers. He's trying to take everything. There was a beat of silence and then a low exhale. Tell me everything. By the time I was done, she was already pulling out a file. This isn't just greedy. It's strategic. Cold. And if what you're saying is true about the erasure, the lockouts, the history rewriting, this isn't just a messy divorce. It's character assassination with legal polish. I didn't cry. I just nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Send me everything you have, she added. We'll start there. But I'm not the only one you're going to need. Next came Theo. The last time I saw Theo March, we were 22 and splitting a bottle of cheap red wine over finals week in college. He had a laugh that could slice through tension like a blade, and a mind that cataloged the law like it was his own language. He'd gone on to become a paralegal for a high-end legal firm, fast, smart, and obsessed with detail. I hadn't spoken to him in a while, but something told me he'd answer. He did. Isabel Donovan, he said with mock theatrical flair. What's it been, a decade? Are we finally starting that jazz band we always joked about? Not quite. I gave him the rundown, short and blunt. He didn't laugh after that. His tone shifted. That's some stone-cold sabotage. You need a team, ISA. Not just legal, technical, too. Someone who can peel back the layers on what he's hiding. I know, I said quietly. I already have someone in mind. Miles Kessler. The name alone tugged a smirk from me. Miles had always been an odd mix of brilliance and paranoia, low profile, off-grid in the ways that mattered. We met when I designed his cousin's studio loft, and he ended up building me a custom project management tool when I complained about the clunky software Lucas insisted on. It had been a favor then. Now, I needed more than a favor. I found his old number in a buried contact file. It rang 6 times before his familiar drawl answered, cautious. Isabel? Hey, I said. I need a rabbit hole cracked open. A pause. Then, a low chuckle. That sounds like trouble. Or fun. Or both. I didn't waste time. Lucas locked me out of everything. I think he's hiding something under my name, maybe money, maybe fraud, maybe worse. I need eyes. Yours. His voice dropped to a professional register. Do you still have any devices tied to the original Harper and Stone accounts? Any cloud backups? Legacy credentials? I think I have a backup drive in storage. And that internal tool you built me, I never deleted it. Perfect. Send me what you have. I'll keep it quiet. By the time I ended the call, I felt like I'd breathed for the first time in days. The fear was still there, humming low beneath my skin, but it had a rival now purpose. Raina, Theo, and Miles. My circle. My line in the sand. I pulled out my old laptop, the one Lucas had called too slow, and pushed into the back of the office closet. It took 10 minutes to boot, but when it did, the old tool Miles made for me flickered to life. A simple dashboard with timestamps, notes, sketches, and files I'd saved in panic or stubbornness or both. There was more here than I remembered. Draft contracts with my initials. Invoice templates bearing my signature. And emails, some from clients, some from Lucas, showing my name in places I'd been written out of since. Evidence. I sent the files to Miles first, then copied Raina and Theo. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen counter where Lucas had handed me my betrayal, and I made a new kind of list. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I still had. Memory. Instinct. People who didn't flinch at the sound of my voice. And now a trail, however faint, of what Lucas had buried beneath years of manipulation. He thought the paper trail was dead. That he'd covered every track, closed every door, silenced every doubt. He didn't count on the fact that I remembered where it all began. That I still had pieces. That I'd kept copies. That I'd trust my gut again, no matter how late. He gave me a goodbye, but I'd made the first call. Miles worked fast. Too fast, honestly. By the time I had poured my second cup of coffee the next morning, I already had 3 encrypted emails in my inbox. One was a full download from the internal Harper and Stone server archives he'd managed to mirror through my old account tool. The second was a batch of financial records, obscure, hard to trace, and certainly not part of our official business ledger. And the third held only a name in the subject line, Anton Rives. I opened the first email and scrolled through file after file. These weren't just old invoices or meeting notes. Miles had managed to reconstruct years of administrative history Lucas thought was buried. Every folder I clicked into made my stomach drop further. There were duplicate invoices with inflated costs, mysterious consultant fees signed off by Lucas, and shell company names I'd never seen before. I wasn't just erased, I'd been framed, in a way that reeked of premeditation. The deeper I went, the more the threads began to knot together. Payments had been funneled to what looked like legitimate subcontractors, but when I dug deeper, running the names through public records and small business registries, most didn't exist. A few did, on paper only. No websites. No work history. No digital footprint. One name kept surfacing across multiple payments and forged consultant fees, Anton Rives. The name was unfamiliar, but it showed up too often to be random. It was listed as a logistics specialist on half a dozen projects I had personally overseen, ones where no such role was ever hired. Lucas had used projects I had designed and managed to hide money, running ghost payments through accounts tied to me. I felt like I was unraveling a sweater that had kept me warm for years, only to discover it had been choking me the whole time. I called Miles immediately. "You found him," I said, barely a greeting. "I found someone," he replied. "Anton Rives isn't on LinkedIn, no real website, but he's linked to at least 4 shell LLCs, registered in Delaware, of course, and 2 out of those 4 list Harper and Stone as their client. So Lucas used my projects to launder money. And he used Anton as the pass-through. That's the theory," Miles confirmed. But it gets worse. He sent another file, this one with metadata tracking. Some of those shell companies were registered using your name, ISA. Not just your project work, your personal information. I blinked. He forged me. Not outright. Not in a way that's obvious. But if you weren't careful, it would look like you signed off on all of it. Which I think is exactly what he's counting on if this ever goes public. The room tilted for a second. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "Breathe," Miles said softly. "The good news is you didn't just remember everything, you saved proof. And I'm backing it all up. But you need to be ready. This is bigger than just screwing you out of a house." He was right. The house, the business, that was personal. But this was criminal. I gathered everything we had into a secure folder, emails, invoices, screenshots of project dashboards, metadata trails, and labeled it version 1. It wasn't the full picture, but it was enough to punch a hole through the spotless image Lucas had crafted. I sent it to Raina and Theo with a subject line that simply read, "Found the dirt." Theo replied instantly. "This is enough to pause the proceedings." Hell, this could blow it all up. Raina's reply was more measured, but colder. "We'll move fast. Don't speak to Lucas. Don't warn him. And do not act like you've discovered anything yet." I wasn't sure I could do that. Every instinct in me burned with the urge to confront him. To throw the papers in his smug face and scream, "I know what you did." But I held it in. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at the folder on my screen. I clicked through the images of the fake payments again, pausing on one labeled Warehouse Supply Review. The amount was absurd, $48,000 for organizing shelving logistics on a small-scale office remodel. I remembered that project well. We hadn't even used a warehouse vendor. He had taken something I loved, something I had poured myself into, and hollowed it out to use as a shell. But he wasn't going to get away with it. I printed everything. Filed the papers into a hard copy binder. highlighted and annotated it like a case file. I ran my hand over the cover once and whispered to no one in particular, "You should have picked someone else." Because now I had a folder. And this time, I was writing the story. The courthouse lobby smelled like lemon-scented polish and nerves. I stood near the tall windows, clutching the black leather folder against my chest like a shield. My heels clicked against the polished tile as I paced slowly, watching attorneys and clients filter through the security checkpoint, heads down, papers clutched, lives unraveling or being mended behind courtroom doors. And now I was one of them. Ready. Raina appeared beside me, dressed in slate-gray power, every line of her blazer sharp enough to cut through lies. She nodded toward the folder in my hands. "Is that the version you want to submit?" I nodded. "It's clean. Chronological. Annotated." Theo appeared next, out of breath, but still grinning like this was some thrilling puzzle. "Judge assigned is Miriam Boland. She doesn't tolerate fluff. If the evidence is real, she'll take it seriously." "It is real," I said. "And it's about time someone else sees it." We stepped into the courtroom together. Lucas was already seated at the petitioner's table, looking every bit the composed entrepreneur in his navy suit and polished cufflinks. His attorney, Dean Vallon, was perched beside him, slick hair, designer pen, a man who smelled like smugness and privilege. Lucas didn't look at me when I entered. Didn't even flinch. But I could feel his certainty like a wall he thought I couldn't climb. I sat at the respondent's table, my palms pressed flat against the smooth surface, grounding myself. The bailiff called the hearing to order just as Judge Boland swept in, robes flowing behind her like a storm cloud. She didn't bother with small talk. "Counselors, let's proceed with the respondent's motion. Ms. Cole, you requested this hearing with new evidence." Raina rose, calm and collected. "Yes, Your Honor. We are submitting newly discovered financial documentation that directly contradicts the petitioner's previous financial declarations. The folder includes detailed invoices, payment histories, and shell company links, implicating Mr. Donovan in a pattern of fraudulent activity involving company and personal accounts." She handed the folder to the clerk, who carried it to the judge's bench. Lucas shifted for the first time, just a flick of his brow. Dean Vallon leaned in to whisper something, his smile faltering ever so slightly. Judge Boland flipped through the folder quickly at first, then slowly. Her expression remained unreadable until she turned to Dean. "Mr. Vallon, were these records disclosed during initial discovery?" Dean stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, I'd have to review the documents in full, but I believe these may be irrelevant or speculative. They show payments from shell corporations registered under the respondent's name without her knowledge," Judge Boland cut in. "Invoices that appear fabricated. And bank activity routed through business accounts without documentation." Dean blinked. "We'll need time to evaluate the authenticity." "You'll have it," she said firmly. "But for now, I'm suspending any asset division until we resolve the origin of these transactions. If what's in this folder proves accurate, this is no longer just a divorce proceeding." The words settled over the courtroom like a thunderclap. Lucas finally turned toward me. His eyes met mine, calculating, and for the first time, I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty. Not guilt. Never guilt. Just fear that his narrative might be slipping out of his control. Raina sat down beside me, her expression cool. Theo squeezed my hand once beneath the table. I didn't say anything. I just breathed. That's all I could do in that moment. Inhale, exhale, hold steady. Judge Boland continued, her tone clipped. "Mr. Donovan, we will reconvene once these claims are investigated. I suggest you and your counsel prepare to speak on the financial record under oath. Until then, all joint accounts are frozen. Any business activity under Harper and Stone Interiors is hereby paused under court order." Lucas's jaw clenched, but he nodded, lips pressed thin. The gavel struck once. Hearing adjourned. As we gathered our things, Dean muttered something to Lucas, who didn't respond. He just watched me with that predator's stillness he'd always mistaken for control. He thought he could silence me with paperwork and passwords. But he hadn't expected a folder. He hadn't expected me. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different, brisk, charged. Reina turned to me, her tone clipped but approving. That was the first shot. Theo grinned. You shook the table, Isabel. They did not see that coming. I looked down at my hands, still steady. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I was fighting, and the momentum had shifted. Lucas had tried to bury me beneath legal jargon and fake contracts. But now the truth had weight. It had color and signatures and file trails. It had a voice, mine. And for once, the room had listened. The first threat came in silence. It was the absence of something I'd always taken for granted: access to my bank account. I was standing in line at the corner market, groceries bagged and ready, when the card reader blinked twice and rejected my transaction. I tried again, slower this time. Same result. Declined. I felt my stomach twist as I offered another card, one I hadn't used in years. That one worked, barely. When I got home, I called the bank immediately. After the usual maze of hold music and transfers, a representative finally spoke. Your account has been frozen due to a flagged investigation. What investigation? I asked, my throat dry. I'm afraid I can't disclose that over the phone. You'll need to speak to someone in person with identification and legal representation. Legal representation. My pulse spiked. I called Reina. She picked up after the first ring. They've frozen my account, I told her, pacing across my kitchen floor. They're pushing back, she said, voice taut with understanding. It's a pressure move. They want to see if you'll blink. Don't. An hour later, I arrived at Reina's office downtown. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked once before entering and froze. Papers were scattered everywhere. Drawers open. The printer ripped out of its socket and lying sideways. A mug shattered on the floor, the coffee long dried into a brown smear. It wasn't just a mess, it was a message. Reina appeared from the back room, her face tight with rage, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I'm reporting it now, she was saying. No, nothing was stolen, but it was intentional. Tell the officer I'll wait. She ended the call and looked at me. They broke in last night. Didn't touch the computers, but they rifled through my files. Looked for something. They didn't take the folder? No, that's in a fireproof safe. Off-site, but they don't know that. I leaned against her desk, trying to steady myself. You think Lucas had this done? He or someone connected to him. It could be Dean. Or Anton. It's hard to say. But you're shaking the tree now, Isabel. And things are starting to fall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I triple-checked my locks. Closed the curtains. Made sure my security system was armed. But even that didn't feel like enough. At 2:13 a.m., my phone lit up. Unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. Silence on the other end. Then a voice, garbled, distorted. Back off. The line went dead. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't sure if it was fear or fury pulsing in my veins, maybe both, but I wouldn't let this scare me into silence. I couldn't. I texted Miles. I just got a call. Distorted voice. Said, back off. Reina's office was broken in two. My accounts are frozen. What else is coming? He replied instantly. I've been tracking server pings. Someone's trying to scrub Harper and Stone metadata. But I also found something else. Check your inbox. Now. I opened the file. A photo. Lucas, meeting with a woman in a crisp black blazer outside a cafe. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her at first. Miles texted again. That's Elise Rowan. FBI. Organized Crime Division. I stared at the screen, stunned. What the hell? I called Miles. Why would Lucas be meeting with an FBI agent? I asked as soon as he picked up. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Could be protective. Could be something else. Maybe he's cooperating. Maybe he's being watched. Either way, it's a wrinkle. A wrinkle. That's putting it mildly. I thought this was just money laundering, I said slowly. A betrayal. Fraud. But this is bigger. Yeah, Miles agreed. You're not just in the middle of a divorce anymore, Isabel. You're in the middle of a federal chess match. I ended the call and sank into my couch, heart pounding. Everything was spinning faster than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about Lucas stealing from me. This was about networks, power plays, manipulation on a scale I hadn't even begun to comprehend. And somehow I was still standing. The next morning, I walked to the front porch, blinking into the sunlight, and saw it. A small, unmarked envelope wedged between the slats of my mailbox. No address. No return label. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single printed photo, Lucas shaking hands with Elise Rowan. And on the back, written in sharp, uneven block letters, "This doesn't end the way you think." I stood there for a long time, wind brushing my hair across my face, photo trembling in my grip. Whoever sent this didn't know me as well as they thought. Because I wasn't backing off. I was digging in. The knock on Reina's office door came at 7:42 a.m., 30 minutes before business hours, and just early enough to feel unsettling. I had arrived a few minutes earlier, still shaken by the anonymous photo and the threats, clutching a thermos of coffee I couldn't seem to drink. When the knock sounded, Reina stiffened beside me, her hand hovering over the drawer that held her taser. Old habits. Smart ones. "I'll get it," she said cautiously, pulling the door open just enough to see who was on the other side. To both our surprise, it wasn't another threat. It was a young woman, early 30s, nervous eyes, blazer slightly wrinkled as if she'd slept in her car. She looked around once before stepping inside. "Reina Cole?" "Yes," Reina said warily. "I'm Jenna Lowell. I work for Dean Vallon. I need to talk to you." Off the record, at first. My breath caught. Reina's eyebrows arched. "Dean's junior associate?" She nodded quickly. "I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I can't be part of this anymore." Reina stepped aside, and Jenna walked in like a shadow with legs. Quiet, shaky, but determined. I watched her closely as she sat across from us, her fingers twitching at the hem of her sleeve. "Why now?" Reina asked. Jenna exhaled, her voice low. "Because your folder was real. Because Lucas panicked. And because I've seen enough forged documents and shady contracts to know someone's going to jail, and I'm not letting it be me." I leaned forward. "You've seen the documents?" "All of them," she said, looking straight at me. "Some I helped compile under orders. I didn't know what I was signing off on until recently. Fake consultants. Double-billed invoices. Internal memos that were doctored. Dean told me not to ask questions, but after your folder hit the courtroom, I started printing backups. I've got files. And names." Reina's eyes narrowed with cautious hope. "You're willing to testify?" Jenna nodded slowly. "If I can get some protection." "I'm scared. Dean is connected. Lucas has people watching me. I've had a car outside my apartment 3 nights in a row. I keep thinking, if I just hand it all over, I can disappear before it gets worse." "What do you have?" I asked gently. Jenna opened her briefcase and slid over a flash drive. "Everything. And I've got hard copies in my glove compartment. Just in case." Reina took the drive carefully, as if it were explosive, which, in a way, it was. "Do you know who Anton Rives really is?" I asked. Jenna swallowed hard. "That's the worst part. He's not just a fake name. He's real. Sort of. He's an alias used by 2 people depending on the contract. Sometimes it's Lucas. Sometimes it's a broker tied to a development firm in Miami. The whole thing's built to confuse investigators." "And the FBI?" I asked. "Do you know why Lucas is meeting with Elise Rowan?" Jenna hesitated. "He's trying to cut a deal. That's what Dean said. Lucas wants to sell out the other players in exchange for immunity or reduced charges. He's not just laundering money. He's been helping move assets for larger entities, shell companies tied to real estate deals overseas. The kind that end in offshore accounts." My mouth went dry. "He used my name for that?" Jenna looked at me, remorse carved into every line of her face. "Yes." And Dean knew. They both did. That's why they're trying to pressure you into backing down. Threats, frozen accounts, surveillance. If you disappear quietly, they think their window stays open. I looked at Reina, who was already copying the files onto her secure system. "This changes everything," she muttered. Theo arrived 10 minutes later and took one look at the flash drive before whistling low. If even half of this checks out, we're looking at full-blown federal prosecution. This isn't just a takedown, it's a bomb. By noon, Raina had called in a favor with a trusted DOJ contact, someone who could confirm whether Elise Rowan was actively building a case and what her angle might be. But none of that erased the image in my head. Lucas, calm and smiling, sitting across from an FBI agent like he was the one steering the ship. He thought he could offer breadcrumbs and save himself. He thought I was just another pawn in a game too big for me to understand. But what he didn't know, what he would never see coming, was that the person he'd underestimated the most now held the entire map. We offered Jenna temporary housing through one of Raina's networks. She left with a burner phone and a backup drive strapped beneath her coat. When she turned to leave, she paused. "Don't let him get away with this," she said, her voice shaking. "He'll do it again. He always does." I watched her go, then looked back at the files still loading on the screen. There were names, locations, transactions worth hundreds of thousands, millions, even. Lucas didn't just betray me. He built a kingdom out of my name and thought I'd never find the gates. Now, I wasn't just walking in. I was tearing them down. The courthouse was colder that morning, or maybe it was just me. The fluorescent lights hummed above as I walked the familiar hallway again, past the same gray benches, the same seals stamped into the tile. But everything felt different now. I wasn't just carrying a folder. I was carrying the kind of evidence that could end a life like Lucas's, the curated image, the carefully manicured empire, the illusion of legitimacy. Theo met me at the end of the hall. He didn't smile. He just nodded and held the door for me. Inside, Raina was already at our table, unzipping a worn leather briefcase and laying out our arsenal, the affidavit from Jenna Lowell, the flash drive full of falsified contracts and offshore transfers, and the newly subpoenaed bank records Miles had helped trace. This wasn't just a folder anymore. It was a fuse. Across the room, Lucas sat with Dean Vallon, arms crossed, face unreadable, but his eyes were different. No smugness. No bored detachment. Just a hard squint, like he was trying to see through something and couldn't. Dean whispered something to him, and for the first time, Lucas didn't nod. He just stared. Judge Boland entered, and the room rose. "Let's proceed," she said without preamble. "Ms. Cole, you may submit your second motion." Raina stood, calm as ever, and handed the new folder to the clerk. "Your Honor, this is our supplemental submission. It contains additional evidence gathered from an insider formerly employed by the petitioner's legal team. The documents detail a fraudulent financial network that uses Harper and Stone Interiors as a front for money laundering, falsified tax records, and the illegal use of the respondent's personal identity." The judge began flipping through the materials. "And this insider, Jenna Lowell? She has provided a sworn affidavit as well as corroborating data. We are also prepared to submit testimony, should the court require it." Dean Vallon rose, his voice slick with disdain. "Your Honor, this is a desperate move from an opposing party that's been seeking revenge, not justice. These so-called documents were obtained without a proper chain of custody. We request they be dismissed as inadmissible." The judge didn't even look at him. "Mr. Vallon, do not insult the court's intelligence. We're talking about dozens of wire transfers to offshore accounts, registered under fake LLCs connected to your client's business and co-founder. Not to mention misuse of personal information. You'll have time to respond. But for now, these documents are accepted into the record." Dean flinched. Lucas shifted in his chair, one hand curling around the edge of the table. His skin was pale now, washed out. He looked like a man watching his world crumble in real time, brick by brick. Judge Boland looked up from the folder. "Based on this new evidence, I am referring this case to the Federal Prosecutor's Office for immediate investigation. Proceedings related to property division are suspended pending criminal inquiry. Ms. Donovan, your identity appears to have been used without consent in business dealings beyond this court's jurisdiction. You may be entitled to additional legal recourse." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just nodded slowly. For the first time in months, I wasn't fighting to prove my place. The court saw it now. It was real. Tangible. The story Lucas had tried so hard to rewrite had been dragged back into the light. Lucas opened his mouth, maybe to object, maybe to beg, but no sound came out. Dean leaned toward him, whispering again, more urgently now. Panic was setting in. I could see it in the way Lucas's hand trembled as he reached for a glass of water. He missed. The judge struck her gavel. This hearing is concluded for now. Counsel will be contacted with instructions from the Federal Review Team. Until then, Mr. Donovan is ordered not to travel out of state and must surrender his passport. That was it. The room exhaled, and everyone moved at once, papers gathered, briefcases zipped, murmurs spreading like smoke. I turned to Raina, my breath still catching in my throat. Is it really over? She shook her head. Not over, but it's turning. You bought yourself more than a win today, Isabel. You got the truth on the record. Theo clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grin wide now. You didn't just show up. You shut them down. As we left the courtroom, Lucas didn't look at me. Not once. He kept his eyes on the floor, jaw tight, hands clenched. Good. I didn't want his gaze. I didn't want his remorse, if there even was any. I didn't want a moment of pity or some shallow apology that came too late. All I wanted was what I finally had, the truth, laid bare, with every forged signature and stolen dollar exposed. Outside, the sky had cleared. It had been gray for days, but now sunlight spilled over the courthouse steps like a quiet benediction. I stood for a long time, breathing it in. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just breathed. The headlines came faster than I expected. Harper & Stone Interiors under federal investigation for financial misconduct. Founder Lucas Donovan linked to offshore laundering scheme. Whistleblower evidence triggers FBI seizure. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee gone cold beside me, refreshing the news feed even though I didn't need to. Raina had called hours earlier to confirm what the world was just learning. Lucas had been arrested in the early morning hours, escorted out of his penthouse in handcuffs. No cameras caught it, no spectacle. But the silence of it only made it more real. Dean Vallon was disbarred 2 days later. The ruling was swift, brutal. His involvement in falsified filings and failure to report known criminal conduct was enough to end his career in one blow. I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast or scream or even smile. I just sat very still, the gravity of it all finally settling into my bones. Anton Rives, whoever he truly was, vanished. The FBI couldn't locate him, not with the names Jenna gave, not with the wire transfers miles traced. It was as if he'd been smoke the entire time, never solid, never findable. And maybe that's exactly what he was meant to be. A ghost built into the system, designed to disappear the moment sunlight touched him. Harper & Stone Interiors was shut down within the week. The government issued a cease and desist, froze the company's assets, and launched a full audit into every project it had touched in the last 5 years. I watched footage of agents hauling out files and servers in boxes with orange evidence stickers slapped across them. The studio I had once dreamed of building into a creative sanctuary now looked like a crime scene. And in a way, it was. I stood outside the building that Friday afternoon, watching from across the street. The sign still hung above the door, elegant lettering, black on cream, timeless in its design. But the windows were dark and the curtains drawn. The laughter, the music, the sound of project pitches and clinking coffee mugs, it was all gone now, replaced with silence. I used to think that if I ever saw this place fall apart, I'd feel triumphant. Vindicated. But all I felt was empty. The studio may have been poisoned by Lucas, but it had also been my dream. My late nights, my vision boards, my style that turned sterile spaces into breathing ones. And now it was lost, consumed by his greed and the choices I didn't see until it was too late. I won the house in the settlement. Not that Lucas had any leverage left to fight me on it. The judge signed the ruling the day after his arrest. No appeals. No delays. Just a stamped conclusion to the place we once called home. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like being handed back a relic. A haunted one. Boxes lined the hallway. His things were already gone. I didn't ask who packed them or where they were sent. All I cared about was reclaiming the air. I walked room to room, barefoot on the cold hardwood, letting the quiet press in. I opened every window, let the breeze in, lit candles, burned sage, not because I believed in rituals, but because the smoke curling through the rooms felt like I was writing a final chapter in the air itself. The bedroom was the last space I touched. His absence there was almost a presence of its own. The space he used to occupy in the bed felt colder than the rest. The nightstand he'd claimed still had a faint ring from his whiskey tumbler, no matter how many times I'd wiped it. I moved it out. I moved everything out. Then I painted the wall. A deep, bold green, something rich and alive and unapologetic. I watched the old, pale gray vanish stroke by stroke, and with each one, it felt less like the place where I was betrayed and more like something new. Something mine. The calls from journalists came, but I didn't answer. The requests to speak on camera, to give a quote, to be the woman behind the story. I declined them all. I didn't want to become a headline. I'd spent too long being written out of one story. I wasn't about to be written into another I couldn't control. Raina called that evening. "It's done," she said simply. "Is it ever really done?" I asked her, fingers resting on the rim of my wine glass. She paused. "As done as it needs to be. For now." After we hung up, I stood on my back patio, watching the sky shift from pink to indigo. I remembered the girl I had been the morning Lucas handed me those papers, numb, shocked, blindsided. I remembered the silence that followed, the breath I held, the stillness before I chose to fight. I'd won. On paper. In court. In truth. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. The first thing I noticed about Driftmore was the sound. Not the crash of waves or the call of seabirds, but the silence between them. It was a clean kind of quiet, not empty, not eerie. Just, honest. The kind of silence that didn't press in, but gave you space. After everything, I needed that more than anything. I drove into town with the windows cracked, letting the salt air blow through my hair. The GPS had long stopped giving directions. Driftmore wasn't the kind of place that needed digital help. It was all winding roads and peeling signs, hand-painted shops with names like Harbor Goods and the Rusty Spoon. The ocean shimmered beyond it all, endless and blue, like a promise I didn't know I was still waiting for. The cottage I'd found sat 2 blocks from the beach. Small, uneven porch. Shutters with chipped paint. It was nothing like the glass and marble house Lucas and I had built. And that was the point. This place didn't care about aesthetics or curb appeal. It had good bones and a locked gate. That was enough. I didn't bring much. Just 2 suitcases, a few notebooks, and a fishing rod I bought at a gas station an hour outside town. Not because I had any idea how to fish, but because I liked the idea of learning something entirely new. Something Lucas had no part in. Something mine. Unpacking took less than an hour. The bedroom window looked out onto a crooked little garden, overgrown and defiant. I made coffee, strong and bitter, and drank it on the porch with my feet propped against the railing. For the first time in months, no one was calling. No one was watching. No court dates. No folders. Just sky, sea, and the low hum of wind through weathered trees. I walked to the beach that afternoon. The sand was soft and gray, not the bright postcard kind, but the kind that felt lived in. A few locals wandered the shoreline, heads down, collecting shells or maybe thoughts. No one asked who I was. No one cared. And I didn't offer anything. I just walked with the tide, letting the water touch my ankles and carry away things I hadn't realized I was still holding: rage, fear, the echo of Lucas's voice telling me I was overreacting, too sensitive, imagining things. I wasn't imagining anything now. I had seen the truth, held it in my hands, and walked through fire because of it. And still, here I was, barefoot on a beach, heart still beating, the world still turning. I spent the next few days in a rhythm I didn't realize I was craving. Mornings started with slow coffee and quiet. Midday walks, exploring streets that looped around like they had nowhere urgent to be. I found a tiny bookshop that sold more tea than literature, run by a woman named Cora who spoke like every sentence was a secret. I didn't tell her anything about me. She didn't ask. We talked about the weather, the goals, how bad the summer tourists could be. At night, I sat on the porch and listened to the sea. No wine, no screens, just me and the dark, learning how to exist without the constant noise of survival. One evening, I pulled out my sketchbook, the same one I hadn't touched since the collapse. I expected my hands to shake, to feel like a stranger to the page. But the pencil moved without hesitation. Not architectural lines. Not mood boards or room drafts. Just shapes. The curl of waves. The sway of seagrass. A crooked little bird perched on a driftwood post. It didn't have to be good. It just had to be mine. The truth is, I wasn't rebuilding my old life. That life was gone. And it needed to be. It had grown toxic, coiled tight around someone else's ambition. I had bent for too long. I had let Lucas dictate the shape of our world until it didn't look like me anymore. And when I stopped fitting, he handed me an ending with his name all over it. But now here, I was building something new. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't curated. But it was honest. Every quiet moment, every salt-washed breath, every imperfect corner of this little town was stitching me back together, thread by thread. On my 6th morning, I walked to the pier with the fishing rod. An old man already sat at the end, whistling something tuneless. He looked at my gear and chuckled. "First time? First everything," I said, smiling. He helped me set the line. We sat side by side in silence, waiting on fish or luck or maybe just time. It didn't matter if we caught anything. What mattered was the stillness, the simplicity, the choice to be here. That was the real win. Not the courtroom. Not the headlines. This. The drift. The peace. And the quiet, defiant truth that I had survived. I had chosen myself. And that would always be enough.